My name is Emily Carter, and I am 30 years old. Until last Christmas, I held on to the naive belief that there was a defined limit to how cruel a family could be while still masquerading their actions under the banner of love. I was standing in the center of my parents' sprawling, immaculately decorated dining room, a flimsy paper plate weighing down my hand, surrounded by 30 of my relatives. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted meats, and the room buzzed with the kind of forced holiday cheer that felt more like a performance than a celebration. Suddenly, my mother tapped her champagne flute with a thin butter knife. The high-pitched ping silenced the room instantly. She stood there, regal and smiling, and announced that it was time for everyone to rally together to make my sister Sarah's dream wedding a reality. Then, she turned toward me. She didn't look at the room. She didn't look at my father. She locked her gaze entirely on me. "Emily," she said, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that felt like acid on my skin. "Your contribution will be $93,000. I let out a sharp, incredulous laugh, honestly expecting the room to erupt in laughter at what I assumed was a tasteless, early holiday joke. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Nobody laughed. My father slowly pushed back his mahogany chair, stood up with the rigid posture of a man preparing to deliver a formal toast, and looked at me with cold, detached eyes. "Every person at this table agrees," he stated flatly. "You owe her this." My fork slipped from my numb fingers, clattering loudly against the hardwood floor. Across the room, Sarah covered her mouth with a delicate hand, but I could clearly see the smug, triumphant smile hiding just behind her manicured fingers. My mother glided closer, her movements fluid and predatory. She lowered her voice just enough to maintain the illusion of privacy, though she made certain every relative within 10 feet could hear the venom in her tone. "Pay for your sister's wedding," she hissed, "or you are dead to this family." The room went quiet in that wretched, hollow way people go silent when they are watching someone suffer and secretly enjoy the spectacle. But the worst part? That wasn't even the moment that truly shattered me. It was what she whispered next, a cold, calculated sentence she believed would finally force me into total submission. Before I reveal what she said, and what transpired after I walked out of that house, I have to ask, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm genuinely curious to see how far this story will travel. I didn't offer my mother a response immediately. I remained frozen, staring at the tiny, vibrant red bow tied neatly around Sarah's wrist, the same bow every bridesmaid had been gifted that evening. I, of course, had not received one. Nobody had bothered to inform me that there was a surprise bridal announcement. Nobody had told me that half the extended family had arrived hours early to celebrate her engagement. I had been lured there at the very last minute with a curt text message. "Don't be late. Your sister needs you." That was the recurring pattern of my life. Sarah needed something, and I was expected to materialize like a spare battery, useful, quiet, and entirely replaceable. My mother's whispered words still burned in my ear, searing through my consciousness. "After everything we sacrificed by keeping you, this is the least you can do. Keeping me." The phrase hit me harder than a physical blow. Not raising me, not loving me, just keeping me. I looked at her face, powdered, pristine, and smiling as if she hadn't just metaphorically stabbed me in front of 30 witnesses, and suddenly, my entire childhood rearranged itself in my mind. Every strange, passive-aggressive comment, every deliberate silence, every moment I was forced to be grateful for the leftovers while Sarah received love like an unconditional inheritance. My father cleared his throat, his expression bored. "Emily, don't make this dramatic." That was the moment I finally set the paper plate down. My hands were shaking violently, but when I spoke, my voice came out with a terrifying, crystal clear calm. "I need some air." Sarah let out a soft, pathetic sob, acting as though my basic, human need to breathe had somehow ruined her perfect evening. My mother lunged, grabbing my sleeve with a bruising grip. "You walk out that door," she threatened, "and don't you dare come crawling back." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back up at the sea of relatives who were desperately pretending not to stare. "I'm not crawling anywhere," I said, and I walked out. I drove home through a relentless, freezing rain, my car cabin filled with a silence so heavy it felt tangible. My phone was a frantic, buzzing strobe light on the passenger seat. Mom, Dad, Aunt Marlene, Cousin Greg, and then Sarah, again and again. I didn't pick up. I didn't even glance at the screen. I just drove, my mind racing through 3 decades of memories, replaying every moment of exclusion and demand. When I finally reached my apartment, the sanctuary of my small, lonely living room felt like a fortress. I locked the door, leaned my back against the wood, and slid down to the floor, my heavy winter coat still on. That was when my eyes landed on the old gray safe box tucked beneath my bookshelf. It had been sitting there for years, a relic of my grandmother, the only person who had ever looked at me and seen a human being instead of a utility. She had given it to me when I was 16, following a disastrous family party where Sarah had been gifted a diamond necklace for simply existing, while I had been cornered and lectured on the virtues of humility. One day, Grandma had whispered, pressing the heavy, cold brass key into my palm, "You'll need to remember what really happened." I had kept it under that shelf, locked and untouched, because I was terrified that if I opened it, I would find proof that I hadn't just imagined the cruelty, that it was, in fact, deliberate. I sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, my breath hitching in my throat as I inserted the tiny key. The lock clicked, a sound that seemed to echo in the quiet room. Inside, the box was a time capsule of my own erasure, yellowing envelopes, blurred photographs, birthday cards that never reached me, and school papers. At the bottom, there was a folded note written in my grandmother's elegant, precise handwriting. I pulled out a photograph first. It was Sarah at age 7, sitting regally on my father's shoulders, wearing a plastic crown at a birthday party while the entire family clapped. In the far corner of the frame, I was standing near the kitchen door, clutching a trash bag that looked larger than my own small frame. I remembered that day with visceral clarity. At 7, I was still under the delusion that helping meant belonging, that if I just worked hard enough, cleaned enough plates, and stayed quiet enough, someone would finally notice me and say, "Emily, come here, this is your family too." Nobody ever did. On the back of the photo, in ink that had faded to a pale brown, Grandma had written, "Emily cleaned the entire party." Linda said Sarah deserved to feel special. The next envelope contained our report cards. Sarah's were mediocre, filled with teacher notes about her need to focus more. Mine were straight A's, accompanied by a glowing recommendation for an advanced summer writing academy. Stapled to my report card was a letter I had never seen before, a rejection note from the academy with my mother's handwriting scrawled across the top in bold. Aggressive ink. Too expensive. Sarah's dance camp first. I remembered that summer perfectly. Sarah had hated dance camp after 3 days, and my parents had bought her an entirely new bedroom suite just to cheer her up. I had spent that July babysitting the neighbors' children, telling myself that writing was just a silly hobby and that I didn't need the academy anyway. Then my heart stopped. I found a bank statement from when I was 17. It was labeled Education Savings Account, Emily Carter. I had asked my parents about that account right before college, and they had insisted there was never anything in it. But the statement showed nearly $40,000 in deposits, all from my grandmother, and a series of suspicious withdrawals made over 2 years. Beside one withdrawal, my father had scribbled, "Sarah's car." Beside another, Sarah's pageant coaching. Beside the last one, engagement fund start. My stomach turned. This wasn't simple favoritism. That would have been buying one child a better birthday gift. This was calculated theft, a financial crime dressed up as parenting. I turned to my grandmother's note at the bottom of the box. Emily, if you are reading this, it means they have finally asked too much. Your parents will tell you that love means sacrifice. Be careful. In this family, sacrifice has always meant that Emily pays and Sarah smiles. I tried to protect the money I left for you, but your mother found ways around me. I kept copies. Do not let them turn your kindness into a contract. I read that last sentence until the words blurred. My phone buzzed again, vibrating against the floor. Sarah had sent another message. Mom is crying. You're embarrassing everyone. Just say yes and we'll move on. There was no "are you okay?" No, that was unfair. Just the demand to comply. Just the instruction to keep the machine running. And in that moment, the shift happened. I didn't feel healed, and I certainly didn't feel brave. I felt terrifyingly awake. I was no longer a child waiting for their approval. I was a 30-year-old woman looking at a paper trail of my own exploitation. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't cry. I simply waited for the morning, knowing that the real fight was only just beginning. The next morning, I did not reach for my phone to apologize. Instead, I grabbed my coat and a thick envelope containing copies of every document I had found in my grandmother's safe box. I had made an appointment with a local attorney named Vivian Shaw. She was known for handling messy, high-stakes estate litigation, and she had the kind of calm, unreadable expression that suggested she had watched families dismantle themselves over money countless times and still managed to enjoy a quiet lunch afterward. I expected a cold, clinical conversation. I expected her to tell me that, legally, parents could be as selfish as they wanted. She did start with the practicalities. I had no legal obligation to pay for the wedding, and I should document every interaction. But when I slid the bank statements across her desk, the ones showing my grandmother's deposits and my father's withdrawals, her professional mask slipped. She leaned forward, her eyes scanning the dates and the handwritten notes. "Where did you get these, Emily?" she asked, her voice hushed. I laid out the entire history. The safe box, the fake education account, the wedding demand, and the constant emotional leverage my mother used to keep me compliant. Vivian tapped a single fingernail against the paper, her brow furrowed. "Emily, this goes far beyond simple emotional manipulation. This is potentially financial fraud." My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. "What do you mean?" She pulled out a legal pad and began sketching a timeline. When a family member sets up an account for a specific beneficiary, especially for education, the legal constraints are very rigid. Who controlled these withdrawals? Was there a trust document? "I don't know," I admitted. "My mother handled everything." Vivian sighed, a sound of practiced frustration. "Of course she did." Something about her tone made the hair on my arm stand up. "Do you know my firm's history with your family?" She hesitated, then continued. "I met your grandmother once, years ago. She was terrified that one of her daughters would pressure the wrong grandchild into giving up their inheritance. She was very specific about the lake house." The room seemed to tilt. "The lake house?" "My mother said that was sold years ago to cover family debts." Vivian folded her hands on the desk. "I can't discuss confidential client history without authorization, but Emily, if your grandmother left specific instructions, and I suspect she did, and those instructions were ignored, you have powerful options." She read my grandmother's note slowly, and for the first time, her face softened. "Your grandmother loved you. She did everything she could to ensure you wouldn't be a casualty of their greed. Before I left, Vivian gave me a mission. Do they have any vendors expecting your payment? Did they use your name to secure services?" It was a sick, sinking realization. Sarah always lived for the aesthetic of wealth, and my parents always spent money they hadn't actually squeezed out of me yet. I spent the next 48 hours making quiet, tactical phone calls. The luxury vineyard venue, the florist, the caterer, the bridal salon, they all had one thing in common. My mother had listed me as the primary financial contributor. They were holding dates and custom orders on the promise that I would wire the funds by the end of the week. I had screenshots of every email, notes from every coordinator, and voicemails confirming that I was their designated piggy bank. I was no longer a person to them. I was a line of credit. Then, at 1:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, Sarah sent the message that finally blew the lid off the box. "You're being dramatic. Mom said Grandma left you money anyway, so stop acting broke. You don't even need it." I forwarded it to Vivian. Her reply came within minutes. "Do not respond. This is the evidence we need." The following morning, Vivian called me, her voice sharp with professional excitement. "Emily, I pulled the public probate records. Your grandmother didn't just leave you an education fund. She left you the lake house. It was supposed to be transferred to a trust for you, but your mother circumvented the legal process. It is currently titled under a shell company controlled by your mother, but the paper trail is shaky. They are trying to hold Sarah's wedding there to cement their claim on the property. They aren't just asking you to pay for the wedding, Emily. They are asking you to finance the theft of your own inheritance." The floor beneath me felt like it was dissolving. The wedding wasn't just a party, it was an act of aggressive colonization. They were using my own grandmother's property to host a ceremony that would publicly erase my claim to it, all while demanding I pay $93,000 for the privilege. I wanted to burn the house down. I wanted to scream. But Vivian was firm. Let them keep talking. Let them commit to the vendors. Let them put everything in writing. People who think they are winning are the easiest to trap. I stayed silent for 2 weeks. I ignored the texts, the sobbing voice notes, and the accusations of cruelty. And then, the invitation arrived for Sarah's final dress fitting. My mother sent it from a burner number. "You need to attend. This is your last chance to repair the damage." I didn't answer. I just polished my armor. I walked into that bridal salon not as a victim, but as the architect of their undoing. The floor was marble, the air smelled of expensive flowers, and my father was there, looking smug, ready to watch me behave. "Our Emily is finally here," my mother announced to the staff, her voice loud and performative. "She's had a hard time accepting her role, but family always comes around." I walked into the center of the showroom, wearing a coat that felt like a shield. I wasn't there to cry. I was there to close the account. The bridal salon was an arena of marble floors, velvet chaise lounges, and the soft, suffocating hum of expensive luxury. Sarah stood on a raised platform, draped in a gown that looked more like a floating cloud of silk and lace than a piece of clothing, a dress that cost more than my first 2 years of college combined. My mother was dabbing her eyes with a designer handkerchief, while my father stood by, checking his watch with the bored impatience of a man who viewed his family as a business venture that had finally started paying dividends. Aunt Marlene and 2 cousins were perched on the velvet chairs, their phones angled perfectly to capture what they were certain would be the moment of my surrender. The consultant, a woman with a practiced, hollow smile, approached with an iPad. "We just need to finalize the payment method for the custom alterations and the remaining balance of the gown," she said, looking directly at me. My mother reached out, placing a manicured hand on my arm. Her grip was tight, a silent warning beneath the skin. "Emily will handle that, dear," she said, her voice dripping with artificial confidence. I didn't move. I didn't look at my mother. I locked eyes with the consultant. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the soft music in the room like a blade. "Emily will not." The room went dead. Sarah, who had been preening in the mirror, froze. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of genuine, predatory confusion. "Seriously," she hissed, her voice trembling with indignation. "You're doing this now?" My mother let out a shrill, nervous laugh, turning to the consultant. "She's just being dramatic. Ignore her." I'm not joking, I said, stepping away from my mother. My father stood up, his face reddening. He took a heavy step toward me, his shadow stretching across the rug. This is not the place, Emily. You are making a scene. I looked around the room, meeting the gaze of every relative watching the spectacle. Actually, Dad, this is the perfect place. Since everyone seems to keep putting my name on bills, I think it's only fair that everyone hears me take it off. Sarah stepped down from the platform, the layers of her gown pooling around her feet. She looked like a trapped bird, panicked and angry. You are humiliating me. This is my moment. No, I countered, reaching into my bag and pulling out the heavy folder I had prepared with Vivian. I am correcting a financial misunderstanding. My mother's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Emily, if you say another word, you are no longer welcome in this family. I didn't blink. I opened the folder just enough to show the printed emails from the venue, the florist, and the caterer. I have contacted every single vendor you engaged on my behalf. None of them has my signature. None of them has my authorization. If anyone attempts to charge me, use my name, or claim I have agreed to sponsor this wedding, my attorney will initiate immediate legal action for fraud. The word attorney hung in the air, cold and sharp. Aunt Marlene, who had been filming, slowly lowered her phone. She looked at the screen, then at me, then at my parents. You brought legal threats to your sister's dress fitting, my father bellowed, his composure finally shattering. You brought financial fraud to my life, I retorted. My mother snapped, her voice no longer honey-sweet, but sharp as broken glass. Fraud? You ungrateful little thief. I carried you, I fed you, I gave up my own peace to raise you, and you stand here counting pennies. I placed Sarah's text message, the one about the money, right on the glass table. Since we are discussing words, let's discuss inheritance. Sarah went ghostly pale. My mother's eyes flicked to my father in a silent, panicked exchange. I had seen that look 1,000 times, the look of two criminals realizing they were being hunted. My father tried to brush it off. This has nothing to do with your grandmother. I tilted my head, smiling slightly. Really? Because Sarah's wedding website lists the ceremony at Grandma's lake house. The consultant just told me the deposit was made based on the premise of a private estate. The consultant blinked, looking down at her tablet, now clearly realizing she was caught in the middle of a lawsuit. Sarah looked at our mother, her voice a fragile whisper. Mom? What is she talking about? For the first time in my life, Sarah looked unsure if our mother could actually save her. But my sister was incapable of humility. Instead, she lashed out. You're just jealous, Emily. You hate that people love me. You hate that I'm happy. I looked at her, the expensive dress, the trembling hands, the mascara-stained cheeks. Sarah, I asked quietly, are you actually happy? Or are you just performing for them too? The question hit her like a physical blow. Her eyes flashed with a flicker of raw, terrifying panic. She wasn't just spoiled. She was a prisoner in a golden cage, raised by people who only loved her when she was a perfect product. Just pay it, Emily. Sarah screamed, her composure finally snapping. If this wedding falls apart, everyone will know. It wasn't a request. It was a plea for the machine to keep running, for me to keep feeding the furnace that was burning me alive. My father took another step toward me, his expression predatory. You're done, Emily. You walk out of this store without settling this, and you are no longer a part of this family. We will cut you off completely. I felt a strange, cold lightness in my chest. You say that like it's a threat, I replied, my voice steady. But for 30 years, you've been charging me admission for a seat at a table where I wasn't even wanted. You've taken my money, my time, and my peace. If that is what family is, then I am not a member. I am a casualty. I turned and walked toward the exit, my boots clicking firmly against the polished marble. I didn't look back. I didn't care if Sarah was crying or if my father was shouting. I pushed through the glass door and stepped out into the crisp, biting air of the afternoon. For the first time, the world didn't feel like a series of debts. It felt like space. It felt like mine. Walking out of that bridal salon was the last time I ever played the role they wrote for me. The weeks that followed were a chaotic storm of legal threats, frantic voicemails, and the slow, painful process of watching my family try to dismantle my life from a distance. My mother didn't apologize. Instead, she tried to escalate. She sent concerned family members to my apartment, told my coworkers that I was having a mental breakdown, and even tried to block my access to my own bank accounts, claiming I was an unstable individual in need of guardianship. But Vivian Shaw was waiting for every move they made. By the time my parents realized they weren't dealing with a frightened daughter anymore, they were dealing with a prepared plaintiff. The legal battle over the lake house was brutal, but it was also the final nail in the coffin of their narrative. When the truth about the shell company and the forged trust documents hit the probate court, the perfect family image they had cultivated for decades began to rot in public. They didn't just lose the lake house, they lost the ability to control the story. My grandmother's lawyer eventually provided testimony that the property had been mine since the day she passed, held in a predatory trust that was never meant to be permanent. I didn't keep the lake house. It was filled with too many ghosts and too many memories of being the girl standing by the kitchen door with a trash bag. I sold it, and with the proceeds and the return of the funds stolen from my education account, I finally bought something for myself, an apartment in a city where nobody knew my last name, where my sister's wedding wasn't a headline, and where my parents couldn't walk through the door and demand a contribution. Walking out of that bridal salon was the last time I ever played the role they wrote for me. The weeks that followed were a chaotic storm of legal threats, frantic voicemails, and the slow, painful process of watching my family try to dismantle my life from a distance. My mother didn't apologize. Instead, she tried to escalate. She sent concerned family members to my apartment, told my coworkers that I was having a mental breakdown, and even tried to block my access to my own bank accounts, claiming I was an unstable individual in need of guardianship. But Vivian Shaw was waiting for every move they made. By the time my parents realized they weren't dealing with a frightened daughter anymore, they were dealing with a prepared plaintiff. The legal battle over the lake house was brutal, but it was also the final nail in the coffin of their narrative. When the truth about the shell company and the forged trust documents hit the probate court, the perfect family image they had cultivated for decades began to rot in public. They didn't just lose the lake house, they lost the ability to control the story. My grandmother's lawyer eventually provided testimony that the property had been mine since the day she passed, held in a predatory trust that was never meant to be permanent. I didn't keep the lake house. It was filled with too many ghosts and too many memories of being the girl standing by the kitchen door with a trash bag. I sold it, and with the proceeds and the return of the funds stolen from my education account, I finally bought something for myself, an apartment in a city where nobody knew my last name, where my sister's wedding wasn't a headline, and where my parents couldn't walk through the door and demand a contribution. I haven't spoken to them in 6 months. I see the occasional photo on social media. Sarah's wedding eventually happened, a smaller, cheaper version of her dream, hosted in a rented ballroom because the lake house was tied up in litigation. She looks beautiful in the pictures, but I see the same trapped look in her eyes that I saw that day in the salon. She is still playing the lead role in a play that nobody is watching anymore. I remember my mother's final words to me in the salon: "You'll come back when you realize nobody else will love you like we do." For a long time, that thought haunted me. But as I sit here now writing this in my own office, in a house that I bought with my own money, I realize she was right, but not in the way she intended. Nobody does love me the way they did. Nobody demands my money to prove their affection. Nobody makes me feel like a spare battery to be used and discarded. Nobody forces me to sit in the corner while they celebrate someone else's worth. The silence in my life isn't lonely anymore. It's quiet. And for the first time in 30 years, the quiet is mine. I learned that blood is just a biological fact, but family is a choice. And for the first time, I chose myself. I didn't get a fairy tale ending, but I got something much better. I got the freedom to start a story that I actually wanted to live. And as I look out the window at the morning sun, I finally understand what my grandmother meant. True sacrifice isn't giving everything you have to people who don't care. It's sacrificing the version of yourself you had to become to survive, so that the person you were meant to be can finally breathe.